Tighter coronavirus restrictions have come into force in Spain, which has been in lockdown for 2 weeks. All non-essential workers have been told to stay at home for the next 11 days. This report from Tania Dendrinos.
A lifeline in the midst of chaos. The military plane full of medical supplies arriving in Madrid from the Czech Republic. And with the bump of elbows, a small glimmer, the nation has not yet lost hope. The contents couldn't be more precious. 10,000 items of protective equipment for health workers after the government's request for medical aid from NATO allies. And time is of the essence. More than 80,000 people have now been infected with COVID-19 in Spain, forcing a further tightening of the country's lockdown restrictions.
Non-essential workers, these are, for instance, construction workers, postal workers, people working on production lines which don't relate to the epidemic, for instance, car workers, some opticians, and even people running shops that are not related to food. They will not be allowed to go to work for the next 2 weeks.
The streets are empty, but it's a stark contrast to the hospitals and morgues struggling to cope under the weight of the crisis.
The government is saying that they are cheered to some extent by the fact that the number of cases is beginning to level out. However, when you speak to doctors in hospitals, they say, well, that may be what the government is saying, but it seems that actually the problem is that not enough people are being tested because there's a shortage of testing kits.
And that's an issue being raised the world over. Tania Dendrinos, BBC News.
Donald Trump has announced that the restrictions imposed in the United States to limit the spread of the virus will be extended until the end of April. The president had previously said he hoped America could reopen for business at Easter. Now, Mr. Trump says the country will be well on the way to recovering by June the 1st. Our North America correspondent Peter Bowes has this.
This is how America's normally bustling city centres look today. Chicago, empty. Philadelphia, deserted. And New York City, unusually quiet. Everyone ordered to stay at home except essential workers like nurses. And this is how it's going to stay. No more talk of getting back to work by Easter. Now President Trump says social distancing guidelines will be extended to the end of April to slow the spread of COVID-19.
The peak, the highest point of death rates, remember this, is likely to hit in 2 weeks. Nothing would be worse than declaring victory before the victory is won. That would be the greatest loss of all.
But many more Americans are expected to die in the weeks ahead. Dr. Anthony Fauci, a leading member of the president's coronavirus task force, says the disease could kill at least 100,000 people in the US.
The idea that we may have these many cases played a role in our decision in trying to make sure that we don't do something prematurely and pull back when we should be pushing.
The president's advisors say it could have been much worse, with up to 2 million Americans at risk of dying if drastic measures hadn't been taken.
If we could hold that down, as we're saying, to 100,000, it's a horrible number. Maybe even less, but to 100,000. So we have between 100 and 200,000. We all together have done a very good job.
New York is still the epicenter of the outbreak in the US, where some health workers say there's a desperate shortage of medical supplies. President Trump has accused hospitals of hoarding vital equipment such as ventilators, which he said should be released for wider use. Peter Bowes, BBC News.